The Russian ruble has been on a downward trajectory, reaching its weakest levels since the immediate aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. This economic slump reflects a confluence of global and domestic pressures that continue to weigh on the Russian economy. Not too long ago, it looked like the Russian ruble had won the sanctions war. Despite a sharp decline in the immediate aftermath of Putin's invasion, the ruble quickly recovered and even reached a 7-year high of 50 to the dollar in June 2022. However, after stabilizing around 90 to the dollar for most of the past year, the ruble has been declining rapidly since August and fell to a new low of 108 to the dollar on Wednesday. The first thing you might wonder is, how do you actually measure the value of the ruble? After all, the ruble can't really be traded at your local currency exchange. In June of this year, the US sanctioned the Moscow exchange, the last place where ruble trading really occurred. The answer is that since then, the Russian central bank has been measuring the value of the ruble using over-the-counter trades. In other words, large volumes of dollars or other foreign currencies are exchanged at banks. These trades usually happen between banks or large exporters like Gazprom, which are among the few commercial entities in Russia still collecting significant amounts of foreign currency. You might be wary of trusting data provided by Russia's central bank, but it's surprisingly credible. According to the Russian constitution, the central bank is operationally independent, and there's a broad consensus that its independence has survived the war. This is evidenced by steep interest rate hikes after the first round of sanctions in 2022 and again in recent months. Such rate hikes are typically avoided by politicized central banks because they're unpopular. The fact that they've happened, despite opposition from Russian political and business elites, suggests the central bank is still functionally independent. According to this data, the ruble's decline has accelerated markedly in the past month. For context, the ruble has been falling steadily since June 2022, when it peaked at around 50 rubles to the dollar. By early 2023, it stabilized at around 90 rubles to the dollar. However, in August, the ruble resumed its decline, falling from 85 rubles to the dollar to a new low of 108. This is bad news for both Putin and ordinary Russians. While a weaker currency might help exporters, it makes imports more expensive, which stokes inflation. In normal times, this wouldn't be catastrophic, but inflation in Russia is already running at over 8% year-on-year. Meanwhile, the central bank has hiked its benchmark interest rate to 21%. For context, interest rates in Europe and the US are around 5%, and even those are considered uncomfortably high. So, why has the ruble declined? We see at least 5 reasons. 1. Increase in the money supply. The Russian government is spending heavily to fund the war, which has dramatically increased the number of rubles in circulation. Historically, the money supply grew by about 10% annually, but since the invasion, it has jumped to 20 to 25%. If the demand for rubles stays constant, an increased supply will decrease its value. 2. Sanctions. The ruble's decline coincides with fresh restrictions imposed by the US on Gazprom Bank, one of the last major non-sanctioned banks in Russia. Previously, Gazprom Bank was crucial for European countries still buying Russian gas. Secondary sanctions have also deterred banks in countries like China and Turkey from doing business with Russian companies, limiting their access to foreign currency. 3. Economic struggles. Russia's economy isn't performing as well as it appeared last year. War-driven government stimulus has triggered a new bout of inflation that the central bank is struggling to contain. This has spooked international investors and encouraged Russians to move their cash abroad, as inflation erodes the value of their ruble deposits. 4. Policy changes. The Kremlin has introduced changes to ease pressure on exporters who are struggling with sanctions and high interest rates. Previously, exporters were required to convert 50% of their foreign currency earnings into rubles, artificially inflating its value. This threshold was reduced to 25% a few months ago. Similarly, a rule requiring exporters to keep 60% of their earnings in Russia was lowered to 40% in July. This has reduced the amount of foreign currency being converted into rubles, putting further downward pressure on its value. 5. Fears of military escalation. The risk of military escalation in Ukraine has grown, particularly after Russia's recent use of an intercontinental ballistic missile. Such developments would be devastating for both the European and Russian economies, accelerating the ruble's decline. Is there anything the Russian state can do about it? Sort of. The central bank could prop up the ruble by spending foreign exchange reserves or tightening capital controls to stop citizens and exporters from selling rubles abroad. However, these are not sustainable long-term solutions. Fundamentally, two things could stabilize the ruble: a steep rise in global energy prices, a reduction in government spending. That said, it's unclear how the Kremlin could reduce spending without at least partially de-escalating the conflict in Ukraine. And that's the latest on today's top stories. What are your thoughts? If you'd like to dive deeper into any of these topics or explore related issues, feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for tuning in and spending your time with us. Stay informed, stay curious, and we'll see you next time. Take care.